In a crowded courtroom, a young teenager stands accused of a crime that seems out of character. Jason, a shy and quiet boy, looks down as whispers fill the air. The judge, a middle-aged man named Judge Stevens, can't help but laugh as he looks at the teenager. His demeanor is one of disbelief, mocking the very idea that this young boy could be anything more than another troubled teen. But little does everyone know, Jason's identity is about to change everything. What happened in that courtroom will leave you speechless, because behind Jason's actions lies a truth no one saw coming. Stay with us as we dive into a story of judgment, empathy, and the shocking revelation that no one expected. Before we continue, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories just like this one. And don't forget to share this video with your friends. Let's spread the power of understanding and second chances. The courtroom was buzzing with activity as people filled the wooden benches, their voices low but filled with curiosity. Jason, a young teenager, walked in with his head bowed, his footsteps heavy with the weight of every pair of eyes on him. His shoulders were hunched, trying to make himself as small as possible, but the eyes of the courtroom still followed him, piercing through his quiet demeanor. Jason's heart raced, his breath shallow, as he took his place in front of the judge. He felt like an outsider, like everyone in the room was already making judgments about him, and it made the pit in his stomach grow deeper. Judge Stevens, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a quick smile, glanced over at Jason with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. He couldn't seem to hide the smirk, tugging at the corner of his lips as he looked at the boy standing before him. Another one of these, the judge muttered under his breath. Jason was accused of stealing a car, a crime that seemed to contradict everything about him. He was quiet, introverted, and nothing like the kind of rebellious teenager people expected to find in a courtroom. Yet there he was, standing before the judge, facing charges that seemed so out of place for someone like him. The room was filled with whispers, soft voices discussing Jason's background, his family, and how he seemed to not belong in a situation like this. The judge, however, didn't seem interested in the details. Instead, he made sarcastic comments and chuckled under his breath, turning the entire case into a spectacle. Jason stood there, his face flushing with embarrassment, feeling as though the judge was mocking his very existence. The emotional weight of the moment settled on him like a dark cloud. Little did anyone know, there was more to Jason's story than they could ever imagine. As the prosecutor stood up to present the case, the room fell into a tense silence. The prosecutor's voice was sharp and firm as he began to paint a picture of Jason's life, one that was filled with struggle, poor choices, and a troubled past. Jason Walters, the prosecutor began, was born and raised in a neighborhood where crime was as common as the air people breathed. His family has never known stability, bouncing from one problem to another. His mother, struggling to make ends meet, did the best she could, but it was never enough. Jason's father, a man with a history of violence and a criminal record, left the family when Jason was young, leaving his mother to raise him alone. The prosecutor's voice dripped with judgment, making it clear that Jason's upbringing was nothing to be proud of. Jason's life in school was no better. He was an outcast, often the target of bullies. The kids at school made fun of him, calling him weak and worthless. His clothes were worn, his shoes were falling apart, and his reputation was that of someone who would never amount to anything. Jason stood still, his head lowered, as the prosecutor's words seemed to dig deeper into the wounds he tried so hard to hide. His past was being laid bare in front of everyone, and the humiliation weighed heavier with every sentence. But this case isn't just about a troubled teenager with a rough background, the prosecutor continued, his tone turning more serious. This case is about a young man who, at the age of 16, thought it would be acceptable to steal a car, not for a joyride, but with the intention to escape his reality and get a fresh start. The room seemed to hold its breath as Jason's actions were explained further. According to the prosecutor, Jason had been caught driving a stolen car just a few blocks away from his home. This, the prosecutor said, is the final straw in a history of bad decisions. However, as the prosecutor spoke, something about the situation didn't seem to add up. The audience, too, had begun to question the reasoning behind Jason's actions. He wasn't a typical delinquent, nor did he look like someone driven by greed or malice. There had to be more to the story. Jason's defense attorney stood up to counter the prosecutor's claims. He asked the court to remember that there was more to Jason than the prosecutor had painted. Jason's decisions weren't made out of malice, the attorney argued. This wasn't about thrill-seeking or rebelling against authority. This was about survival. About a young boy who has been forced to grow up far too quickly, trying to escape a life that was never his choice. The courtroom grew quiet again, but this time there was a shift. People began to look at Jason differently, understanding that there was more to him than the label of a troubled teen. His past wasn't a simple list of mistakes. It was a story of a boy who had been dealt a bad hand, someone who had been desperate for a way out. Jason didn't steal the car to hurt anyone. He stole it because he believed it might be his only chance to escape the pain and the hopelessness of his life. As his side of the story began to unfold, it became clear that Jason wasn't just another delinquent. He was a boy lost in a world that didn't give him the chance to succeed. He wasn't a villain. He was a victim of circumstances, trying to find his way out. Judge Stevens sat back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him, his gaze fixed on Jason, as the defense attorney finished presenting the teenager's side of the story. The room was silent, the tension palpable, but Judge Stevens, with years of experience, seemed unfazed by the weight of Jason's words. Instead, he gave a quick, almost dismissive glance at the young boy standing before him. A slow, mocking chuckle escaped the judge's lips. "Oh, I see," he said, leaning back in his chair. "A tough neighborhood, a troubled childhood, a broken home. Sounds like a story I've heard 1,000 times before. Another misunderstood teenager, trying to escape the inevitable. Huh?" His tone was dripping with sarcasm, and his words made it clear that he wasn't taking Jason's situation seriously. Jason's face flushed with humiliation, his eyes darting nervously from the judge to the rest of the courtroom. The judge's laughter seemed to echo in his ears, each word landing like a punch to his gut. He stood there, feeling smaller with every second, like an insignificant pawn in a game he didn't even understand. The courtroom didn't help either. The audience, who had been whispering among themselves, couldn't suppress a few snickers. Some exchanged knowing glances, while others shook their heads, making it clear that they too had already decided who Jason was. Another troubled teen who had made his bed and now had to lie in it. Jason felt his knees weaken. He could feel the eyes of the room burning into him, their judgment sharp and unforgiving. He'd been prepared for criticism, but the judge's reaction was different. It wasn't just cold indifference, it was ridicule. Judge Stevens continued, his voice laced with mockery. "I've seen so many kids like you, Jason. You all tell the same story. Too much hardship, too much pain, and somehow, you always end up making the same bad choices. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll learn from this, just like everyone else." Another day, another delinquent case. The words stung like salt in an open wound. The judge wasn't even interested in the truth behind Jason's actions. To him, Jason was just another face in a long line of lost causes, no different from the others he'd dealt with over the years. The injustice was clear. Jason wasn't being judged for his actions, but for the simple fact that he had come from a place where people like him were doomed from the start. Jason's shoulders slumped further as the judge's scorn washed over him. But deep down, he knew something the judge didn't. His story wasn't finished yet, and it wasn't about to end in ridicule. Just as the judge was about to dismiss the case with a wave of his hand, the courtroom door swung open, startling everyone. All eyes turned toward the entrance as a well-dressed man stepped into the room. He was tall, his dark suit sharply pressed, and his presence seemed to demand attention. His arrival was unexpected, but there was something about him that made everyone pause. He cleared his throat, and his voice echoed in the room as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, if I may," the man said, his tone calm but firm. "I'm Detective Matthews, and I have new information regarding this case that I believe the court should hear." The judge, clearly irritated by the interruption, gave a half-hearted wave. "This better be important, Detective," he muttered, clearly eager to wrap things up. Detective Matthews nodded, undeterred by the judge's dismissiveness. "It is, Your Honor. What I'm about to share could change the way you look at this boy." Jason, who had been holding his breath with every passing moment, felt a sudden surge of anxiety. He hadn't expected anyone to speak on his behalf. Not like this. The detective turned to face the room, his gaze landing on Jason for a brief moment before he continued. "The boy you see before you," Detective Matthews said, pausing to let the words settle, "is not just a troubled teen from a broken home, as some may believe. His name is Jason Walters, but what most people don't know is that his father was a well-known and respected local hero, someone who dedicated his life to making this community better." The words seemed to hang in the air, and a murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Jason's head snapped up in shock. His father? A hero? He had kept that part of his life hidden from everyone, and yet, here it was, exposed for the world to hear. Detective Matthews went on, his voice steady as he painted a different picture of Jason's past. Jason's father, Robert Walters, was a beloved figure in this town. He was a community leader, a mentor, and a man who worked tirelessly to help those in need. But just over a year ago, Robert was murdered. His death was a devastating loss, not just to his family, but to the entire town. Jason's heart clenched. His father's murder had been a wound that had never fully healed, a pain he'd carried in silence. He'd never told anyone about the constant ache he felt, the feeling of never being able to measure up to the legacy his father had left behind. The detective's next words sent shockwaves through the room. Jason didn't steal that car out of carelessness or rebellion. The car wasn't stolen for fun. It was part of a plan. Jason was trying to find the person responsible for his father's death. He believed that car might lead him to answers, that it could help him discover who had killed his father and why. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the revelation heavy on everyone. Jason wasn't just some delinquent teenager. He was a boy who had lost everything, a son desperately trying to seek justice for a father he admired deeply. Jason's eyes brimmed with tears, but he quickly wiped them away, not wanting anyone to see the cracks in his armor. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his father, and the truth no one had known. Detective Matthews turned to the judge, his expression now serious. "Jason is not the criminal here, Your Honor. He's a grieving son, lost and confused, trying to make sense of a world that turned upside down the moment his father was taken from him." The courtroom was still. Not a single person moved or whispered. The heavy silence hung in the air as everyone processed what had just been revealed. Jason, the shy, misunderstood teenager, accused of stealing a car, was not who they had all assumed him to be. The truth had come crashing down, like a wave, and for the first time, Jason felt a strange sense of clarity, even though the pain in his chest was still there, raw and aching. Judge Stevens, who had mocked and ridiculed Jason moments earlier, now sat upright in his chair, his eyes wide with disbelief. The sarcastic smirk that had once played across his lips was gone, replaced with an expression of deep regret and shame. His gaze flickered back and forth between Jason and Detective Matthews, as if trying to piece together the truth that had so suddenly been laid bare. The audience, who had once snickered and whispered about Jason's troubled life, now looked at him differently. They had judged him too quickly, had written him off as just another delinquent, without knowing the full story. The atmosphere had changed. What had been a moment of mockery now felt like one of collective introspection. Jason stood in front of them, feeling the weight of their shifting gaze. He could feel their eyes on him, but it wasn't the same. Before it had been judgment, ridicule, but now it was something else: sympathy, regret, and even awe. His pain was no longer something to be mocked, but something they understood. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure, but the words didn't come easily. "I wasn't aware," Judge Stevens muttered, his voice quieter than before. "I didn't realize the full extent of your circumstances, Jason." Jason didn't respond. He stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. But now it was different. He wasn't just some boy accused of a crime. He was a son grieving the loss of a hero. The truth had shifted the entire room, but the hurt Jason had carried for so long still lingered. His past wasn't just a collection of mistakes. It was a story of loss, of trying to survive when the world seemed determined to break you. He raised his head slightly, a small spark of defiance in his eyes. The judgment had shifted, but his battle was far from over. Judge Stevens sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had just transpired pressing down on him. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of regret. He had misjudged Jason, dismissed him as just another troubled teenager, without considering the real pain he was carrying. Finally, the judge cleared his throat, his voice quieter than before, as he spoke with a sincerity that had been absent earlier. "Jason," he began, his eyes softening, "I owe you an apology." The room fell silent, everyone hanging on the judge's every word. "I made a mistake," Judge Stevens continued, his gaze meeting Jason's for the first time with a look of understanding. "I laughed at you, mocked your story, and assumed that you were just another lost cause. I didn't take into account the trauma you've been through. I didn't see the grief, the pain that drove you to make the choices you did." Jason's heart fluttered in his chest as he listened. The judge's apology, though unexpected, felt like a small weight being lifted off his shoulders. The bitterness he had felt just moments ago began to fade, replaced by a flicker of relief. "I'm sorry," Judge Stevens said, his voice softening further. "I should have seen the person standing before me, not just a label or a stereotype. I promise that I will handle this case with the respect it deserves from here on out." "You are not just another troubled teen, Jason. You are a young man who has been through far more than anyone should have to bear." Jason's eyes welled up with unshed tears, but he kept his head held high. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, a step toward understanding, a glimpse of hope. As Jason walked out of the courtroom, the weight that had once burdened him seemed just a little lighter. The harsh judgment he had faced from the moment he stepped inside had shifted. The truth had come to light, and with it, the understanding that had been so desperately absent. For the first time in a long while, Jason didn't feel like the victim of his circumstances. The judge's apology still echoed in his mind, a rare acknowledgement that he wasn't just another face in the system, but a person with a story that deserved to be heard. His future was still uncertain, but the revelation of his true identity as the son of a hero, and the empathy finally shown to him, gave him something he hadn't had before: hope. As he stepped outside into the sunlight, Jason took a deep breath. The world still felt heavy, and the pain of losing his father would always be there, but the path ahead seemed just a little bit clearer. He wasn't defined by his past mistakes or the way others had perceived him. He was someone who had been given a chance, a second chance, to prove that he could be more than the sum of his struggles. The story of Jason's day in court leaves a powerful message. Assumptions can be dangerous, and empathy has the ability to change the course of someone's life. In a world quick to judge, sometimes it only takes one person, one moment of understanding to change everything. Jason's journey wasn't over, but it was now a journey he could walk with the hope that others might start seeing him for who he truly was, not for who they assumed him to be. And so, Jason's story reminds us all of the power of understanding and the danger of assumptions. In a world where judgment often comes too quickly, we must remember that everyone has their own struggles, their own battles that we may never fully see. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to listen, to empathize, and to change the course of someone's life forever. Jason's future is still uncertain, but one thing is clear: he has been given a chance to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. His journey is far from over, but with hope in his heart and a new perspective on the world, the possibilities ahead are endless. As we reflect on Jason's journey, let's remember that kindness, empathy, and second chances can make all the difference in someone's life. So the next time you encounter someone who seems to be struggling or acting out, take a moment to consider their story. You never know how much it might change things for them. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If you were moved by Jason's journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, leave us a comment below, letting us know your thoughts. What do you think is the true power behind understanding others? Until next time, remember, everyone has a story. Don't judge them too quickly. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss a story that might just change your perspective. Share it with your friends, because we all need a little more empathy in our lives. See you in the next one.